Welcome to the Money Marketing Podcast, this time bringing you our instant take on the Chancellor Rachel Reeves's spring statement, which we've just seen delivered in the House of Commons. My name is Tom Brown, I'm editor of Money Marketing Magazine, and to pick over the bones of the statement, I'm delighted to be joined by two very special guests, Chris Jones from Dynamic Planner and Jeremy Fawcett from Platforum. Thank you both for joining me. Just to set a bit of a context, spring statement obviously differs a fair bit from the autumn budget, which is the big financial event of the year where major decisions are announced. This is more like a sort of check-in, offering an overview of the state of economy, updates on public finances, and maybe responses to new economic forecasts from the OBR. But fewer new policies traditionally, although in recent years that line has become a little bit blurred depending on the political climate. And certainly given the current political and economic climate, there's been perhaps more focus on this statement than previous ones. So to start with, I guess, just to get your instant thoughts, sort of what most caught your eye. Chris, do you want to give your initial feelings about it?
Yeah, I think we were thinking, as obviously you were in your articles in the general press, and most of us were thinking about how is she going to make it add up. You know, you look at the 2.5 billion of spending into defence. You looked at obviously the amount that they were going to attempt to cut from the DSS budget. It was a risk that the OBSR would come out today and it wouldn't add up, and whether or not the fiscal rules were at risk or not. I mean, we know that Germany is looking to obviously segregate out their defence spending away from their budget, and they're quite sort of practical people when it comes to budgets, I'm sure. So you'd have thought that's not a bad way of doing it. So the surprising thing, I think, is the fact that none of that happened, and she has actually made it add up.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the detail is of all these things is the assumptions which the OBR have rightly accepted is how do they play out in reality, and how do they affect our viewers and their clients.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, just echoing that, really. I mean, it wasn't meant to be a fiscal event. The Chancellor's talked about having a single fiscal event, and this is really just a sort of calibration in terms of what the OBR have been seeing. So apart from the fact that the headroom was pretty tight and we haven't seen any real economic growth, that we weren't expecting any policy other than what's been trailed around sort of welfare cuts over the last few weeks. So I think we just sort of see it as that's what we expected. Where it's interesting is where it fits into the overall context of a new Labour government, a pretty huge budget in the autumn of 2024, and what's expected now in terms of a spending review, and what is potentially going to happen in the next budget in the autumn later this year.
Yeah,
I think those are the issues that financial advisors are going to be concerned about.
well, it's certainly teed up the autumn budget nicely because I mean, it was worth reiterating what some of the things that we thought might be talked about. I mean, complete silence on pensions reform or closing the pension savings gap. Nothing on extension on the freeze to income tax thresholds, which we thought might be a way of that they would raise extra revenue. Nothing about reform of cash ISAs. That there was some chat about cutting the allowance that might be pushed back now to the autumn budget. Nothing really about relief measures on the impact of national insurance contributions for employers, which is has been one of the headline things that we talk. Have you surprised, Chris? There's nothing on any of those things, or is that pretty much in line with your expectations?
Well, I suppose we were hoping there was going to be something of that nature, particularly because we could talk about it here. But also, I think we are, we're about 10 days away, whatever it is, from a new tax year. If we're employed, the last payslip you had was under the new regime. You're going to have a different payslip next time, and it's going to be feeling the effects of the previous budget. So I think most of the people are going to be feeling the impact right now of the previous autumn statement, and how that actually runs through, how we are going to, as employers, how we're going to deal with the national insurance costs and so forth. So I think it's interesting that they didn't have to do anything about that because it hasn't been fully felt yet. And it'd be interesting how people react to the their income and outgoings in the next couple of months. The idea that the OBR will say, well, actually, you're 500 quid better off than you would have been than we said we were going to be in autumn. Well, we haven't felt it yet. So
Well-
we haven't felt, so it's basically saying, well, we did tell you you're going to be worse off and you're not going to be quite as bad off, but you've not actually experienced it yet.
Yeah, I mean,
That's the weird one.
I was going to mention that 500 quid. There was one of the things that did prick in my ears a little bit, and you very, very efficiently sort of like has already written a nice sort of piece for us on the spring statement, which will be on our website shortly. But this, yes, I mean, £500 better off than forecast in the autumn. But will people be feeling that? Will people really think that? It seems like a rather arbitrary, rather paper figure to me. Jeremy?
Well, I mean, look, that's an average figure across the population, and the financial advice community they don't serve that part of the population. They serve a more wealthy section of the population who are probably not £500 better off. They're potentially significantly worse off. So that is the picture that the Chancellor is going to present across the whole nation, but it doesn't really relate to the context that we're looking at within our industry.
Sure.
If you're an employer, you're going to have to make decisions. So, obviously many of the clients in the advice industry are self-employed rather than work for the government. So, they are going to be dealing with high national insurance costs, other costs elsewhere, perhaps more difficult marketing conditions for their own businesses and so forth. They're either going to have to make a decision of cutting costs or cutting staff or taking less profits from themselves. So I'll give you an example. I obviously can't say who it is, but one of my somebody I know, one of my friends, is £10,000 a month worse off. And personally, and now obviously he's got wealthy to be in that situation. Going back to your wealthy client, that's far from the 500 quid, but that's a bigger income. Where'd you find that? And I think that kind of the challenge is the challenge of the overall increase in taxation and the move from supporting the self-employed and entrepreneurs and the people who are typically our clients into a structure which will get you a job working in defence, will get you a job as a builder working and building new homes, will obviously impact a whole chunk of people. But there are kind of, obviously there's a crossover, but they tend to be not the people who our advisors are serving. So, at the end of the day, you're right insofar as most of the advisor clients are able to look after themselves.
Yeah.
What's stark, I think, and obvious from a Labour government's spring statement is the fact that at the end of the day, you can't trust the government to look after you if you're in this sort of client base, and you have to rely on the financial services system and the financial advisors to be self-reliant, because you can see the benefits if PIP's being cut and less people are going to get it. There was talk about pensions being cut as well. In reality, if you can afford to take advantage of financial services and financial products, you should.
Yeah.
So I think that's why we haven't seen much in this statement, because the Chancellor has set a lot of hairs running, already. So we haven't seen the national insurance impact yet. We haven't seen the impact on IHT because that hasn't come in yet. But that clearly is setting up a whole train of thought around financial advice, pension planning. CGT, okay, so that is in place. That's another big sort of shake-up of the financial planning world. And then also you've got the Edinburgh reforms. You've got some interesting continuity between the incoming government and previous government on that. You've got some big stuff in there around the pensions review, advice guidance boundary review, some better alignment between government, the FCA, and the Financial Ombudsman Service that's sort of playing through within that. So there's a load of stuff to come. So the Chancellor definitely didn't want to introduce anything new this time round, and unless they absolutely had to.
Yeah, she set all these hares running, and she wants them to keep. She doesn't want to shoot. Stretching the analogy, she doesn't want to shoot them. She wants them to keep running so that they can prove their worth. I suppose, over the longer term.
And I think the only worry from going into today is, so the Chancellor could balance the books today. The concern is whether she can balance the books in the next autumn budget, or whether we need to see, further policy changes at that point, that will layer further on to what are pretty big changes from the last budget.
Yeah, and it was certainly a very sort of ladies not for turning sort of statement, wasn't it? It was very kind of like, well, we promise that we're not going to write any rises in income tax, national insurance, or VAT. Stability. I lost count of the number of times she mentioned stability and working people, and also this promised by the Labour government, delivered by the Labour government, opposed by a Conservative government. She clearly thinks that's a great mantra. But also saying that our fiscal rules are non-negotiable, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
It was a very sort of, because there have been calls for her to be more sort of radical or drop her fiscal rules or this, but no sign of that. And I suppose from a political point of view, if not from an economic point of view, she can't really do that. She's locked herself in.
Yeah. So I'm not sure we expected to see it change the fiscal rules. That would have been a pretty big shift. But she didn't need to use that language.
No.
Not non-negotiable, repeated. So, people have said she's boxed herself in on this. Yeah. And, and she's chosen to remain boxed in on it.
Yeah.
I think you're right about, we looked at in this conversation before, we've looked at the actual detail of the assumptions. Going back to Sunak's budget was relying heavily on individual productivity, and that individual productivity never happened. This budget is relying on the fact that through the Mansion House reforms, can you divert money that's in pension funds and so forth into infrastructure that pay for that infrastructure to get jobs, for builders to be able to pay more tax and deliver more services? Can you actually, as Lord Rothschild says, buy the sounds of gunfire? Yeah, let's invest in the British military economic machine, whatever she calls it. I mean, that's quite a punchy thing to do.
Yeah, it is.
That makes sense if you're running an OBR forecast, and doesn't mean that it's actually going to work in this year, next year. It takes a long time for that to work. Yeah. And one of the phrases she also used, I think she used it in the preface as well as in the thing, was obviously we are going to be an active government. Mm-hmm. So what then do you do if you're an active government that's played expensive capital long-term chips, relying on the Mansion House reforms, relying on defence industry to drive jobs and so forth, and it doesn't work? Is that then the time where actually I need to be active? I'm now going to make short-term policy decisions because of that she's boxed in on one hand and they've got public opinion on the other.
Mm. Yeah, I like the way you express that. And I mean, if you think about the sort of pensions, looking at bigger pools of pension assets, and the expression that's used is more productive UK assets. And that I like the way that she's sold that in. And she used similar language around defence today. So how do you turn a problem into an opportunity? So we've got to spend a load more money. Okay, so let's build this industrial complex, defence industrial complex, and that's going to generate jobs, and we're going to focus it on new technology. We're going to focus it on drones and AI-driven technology. We're going to invest in some of these sort of key military areas. So I quite like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also one of the luxuries or one of the benefits of having a ridiculously large majority. Yeah. So any government, if it's got any kind of duty whatsoever, you go into a parliament where you've got that kind of majority, you've got a duty to make long-term big decisions for the good of society, because you can. Whereas, of course, if you've only got a majority of one, you probably have to make short-term ones.
Which is in a way why I'm surprised she's she's not being more radical, or she is locking herself in quite tightly with the majority as has. It's almost that she is very frightened of, she's acting like Labour have got a far smaller majority than they do. But
Well, I've got to remember that the free market economy and our industry is the fastest democracy in the world. So the problem you've got is that if people can vote with their units, and of course if she wasn't talking to the electorate, she was talking to the city.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
She's also comparing herself against a huge political event, which was the disaster of the mini budget and how the bond market.
Yeah, she wasn't shy of bringing that up a few times.
Yeah,
as you would, I suppose.
Yeah. So if you're getting quite tight on your borrowing. If you're borrowing at a level that bond markets are beginning to, take a little bit of fright, then, you've got to be careful with that, because she just doesn't want anything that looks like the mini budget to happen to her, because that, politically would be absolute suicide. So, they haven't got a lot of headroom, but you wouldn't want to have excess headroom, because that's going to really restrict what you can do. So she's able to calibrate things by going into a spring statement and just making some tweaks effectively. Bear in mind, they're pretty big. She's got to spend some political capital on those tweaks. I mean, squeezing the welfare budget is clearly not going to play well. Yeah. I mean, that was mentioned today, but it was just it was sort of quietly mentioned and move on. Obviously there's a very big proportion of her MP base who don't like a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, sure.
The other thing just to bear in mind is that Labour, generally speaking, is a bureaucratic party. They do bureaucracy well. And the bureaucracy is why perhaps we're taking a long time to get the answers to the IHT on pensions reform. They'll have a consultation, they'll do some more paperwork, and they'll have some more consultations, some more committee meetings, and so forth. And that's what they're good at. When you look at the cost savings across the board on central government, I think it was 15% or something like that, from AI and technology. Obviously, Dynamic Planner has part of Dynamic Planner is technology, and we're building AI and so forth. Is that we're delivering it for a small fintech company, which obviously great that everyone wants to invest in fintech companies, but that's what we're doing, and it is difficult. And clients of ours say, why can't you do this? And it's hard, and it's hard to do it in a genuinely agile, progressive small company. Pick that up and say, now do that in the civil service.
Yes.
I mean, how are you going to get those benefits realised when you've got not the stakeholders, which are career bureaucrats, career civil servants, things like the NHS thing that took it took years. So what is it that they're going to be able to do? And obviously they're going to be laying they made provision for lots of voluntary redundancies across the civil service. That, I mean, if they can pull it off, brilliant. I mean, but they're not muscular chainsaw. Then so it's not going to be as easy to dismantle the machine that is the British civil service in the same way as it is across the states, and that's going to take some day. If she pulls it off, well done. But as you say, in terms of all the stakeholders and competing people, that's a tricky one.
Well, that is where she's got a mandate and a significant majority, and I think the previous government were very hamstrung by not having that. They chose to spend their political capital on on Brexit, for example, meaning that they could do very little about the welfare state and reforming public services, civil service. So that potentially gives this Chancellor this government a bit more opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
Well, yes, Minister, isn't it? You're going to have lots of Humphreys there going, oh no, we can't have AI here.
Very, very, very courageous movement.
Yes, very courageous. Do you want to pay off this?
Can we just go back to the OBR sort of forecasts, because that's took up a lot of this spring statement. So they've slashed growth forecast for the coming year in half, essentially, from 2% to 1%, which is, as Rachel Reeves herself said, I'm not satisfied with those numbers. That's quite a considerable reduction, isn't it?
Yeah. problem, I suppose we were talking before about how there weren't many leaks for this spring statement, and not a lot was going to happen. But you wonder whether everyone was talking in the press and about it being worse than it was, and maybe they did obviously leak out a little bit of negativity.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, I found myself pleasantly surprised that it was still a positive one, even though that is a half of what it was before.
I mean, she used it as a springboard to double down on all of her sort of like,
Yeah.
this is now why we need to take action to grow the economy, and this is why we're doing da 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 da. But yeah.
I mean, look, no one expects to be able to go to rapid growth from a standing start, and there's nothing new here. That we have, there's not a lot of growth. Growth is sclerotic within the economy, has been for some time. So she was lucky today in the sense that she had to announce a pretty drastic reduction for this year. But don't worry, you're going to get it back over the next 3 years. So
and she had those nice inflation figures just before the statement, as well, which is a spoonful of sugar and all that, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose we're coming towards the end. Is there any sort of like final thoughts that either of you might have?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of, we haven't really got into sort of implications for financial advisors, big stuff out of the budget last year around pensions, from an advisor perspective, really going from being about using the pension last to using it first. Lots of potential areas of sort of reskilling around trust-based planning, use of some life insurance products like onshore bonds. So planning sort of feels as though it's getting more technical, more complex. Potentially, that's a really good thing for certain types of financial advisors. And the situation that doesn't change at all is that financial advice, full fat, ongoing financial advice, there is an undersupply of that service. So I think for certain types of financial advisors, that the current political situation is a really good one. There's a big shift in the planning environment, and that creates some big opportunities for certain types of financial advisors.
Yes, and you made the point as well. It's the whole idea of, as you said earlier, supporting people through these personal financial shocks. It's up to the advisors and the clients to do that, not the state.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it's interesting where you've got a much more coordinated, what seems to be a more coordinated Treasury and FCA. There's a couple of things in the FCA's strategy document yesterday that have been echoed in the budget, and even things like making it easier for first-time buyers to buy houses, whilst also throwing money into the housing building houses. We'll reduce planning, and you can increase borrowing. So there's a lot of little things that are hand in hand, but I also think that we've had a period of time where everything was around about the growth in your investments and even some of the technical financial planning stuff. But you've got to get back down to, fundamentally what a financial planner is, and it is the income, outgoings, asset and liabilities. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, going back to the example I gave earlier. If it's like Mr. McCoolber, you might have a lot of money, but if you suddenly find yourself spending more than you earned, you're going to be in difficult. And I think just getting back into the purity of what financial planning has always been, which is income, outgoings, asset, liabilities projected over time, and dealing with the human in front of you and what are their challenges, because the challenges are so much more. What are their fears? You've got people who are scared of stuff they've heard that isn't going to be happening for 2 years, even if it gets past consultation. So there's this, I think we've gone from a very sort of stable. We know that we're going to do ISAs this way, pensions that way. It's all pretty much the same. We get nice steady growth, and we'll do a wealth management sort of job, through to so much sort of uncertainty for small business people and people that have the balance in their budgets, that we just got to remind everybody, the market and the regulators and consumers, how important it is that the advisor sits down with you and does this income outgoing stuff, does his own personal budgeting, and helps you personally manage through your concerns and challenges. And if we can amplify that then the value will not be in doubt.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And there's the bedside manner, the reassurance that financial advisors need to give their clients. That was key in the run up to the last budget. And I think what we can see from this spring statement is it's going to be key again in the run up to the next budget. Lots of adjustment of financial plans going on as a result of the changes from the last budget around pensions, estate planning, a whole lot of other things. So absolute key time for financial advisors.
An ongoing service review, it's an opportunity to change the nature of your service so it's right for your client and it's right for your business, and technology can help you to do that.
Fantastic. Well, we'll be diving into all of this and more in the coming weeks and months, no doubt, on Money Marketing and elsewhere. But in the meantime, Jeremy, Chris, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Cheers.